You don't come in here. You never set foot in my house again." Ryan's voice echoed through the polished marble entrance, cutting through the sound of loud music coming from the gardens. The young man was impeccable in his expensive suit, his face red with shame and anger. The man standing at the door, Lawrence, felt the air leave his lungs. He wore his work clothes, worn pants, boots dirty with red dirt from the ranch, and his calloused hands held a small gift wrapped in simple paper. It was his son, the man he had given everything to, who now forbade him from entering the mansion, humiliating him in front of dozens of elegant guests, all because he looked like a simple cattle rancher. Lawrence had driven for 4 hours just to give his son a hug on his birthday. Lawrence swallowed the pain, looked at his son with a deep sadness that weighed more than any fatigue, and just nodded. He didn't say a word, just turned and left, leaving Ryan to celebrate his victory and return to his friends. But what that spoiled son didn't know was that the gate he closed wasn't the mansion's. What happens when pride blinds a son to the point where he humiliates his own roots? In this story, the turnaround that follows is more impactful than any humiliation. The old father, the simple cattle rancher, was about to teach a lesson that would change Ryan's destiny forever, because the true owner of everything was just going back to the ranch. If you believe that humility conquers pride, go ahead and leave your like to help this story reach more people. Comment your name and the city where you live, so I know where you're watching from. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the exciting unfolding of this story. The night was clear, and the loud music defined Ryan's success, or at least the success he believed he had built. The party was the event of the year, at least in the social circle Ryan now frequented. He had moved to Houston 5 years ago, quickly climbing the career ladder within a large investment company. At least that's what he told everyone. The mansion, rented by him, or so they thought, was proof of his victory. Colored lights illuminated the giant pool. Waiters circulated with trays of expensive drinks, and the conversation was loud, full of forced laughter and discussions about stocks and international travel. Ryan was at the center of it all, next to his fiancée, Brittany, a woman who seemed sculpted for that environment. He felt powerful, untouchable. The world was his. That's when the intercom rang. The security guard, instructed not to disturb, reported with hesitation, "Mr. Ryan, there's a man here at the gate, says he's your father, but he doesn't look like a guest." Ryan's blood froze and then boiled. His father, he had told Lawrence not to come, had invented a business trip, but the old man was stubborn. "He doesn't understand," Ryan muttered to Brittany, adjusting his collar. "I'll handle this." He marched to the main entrance, an imposing structure with double solid wood doors. And there was Lawrence. The contrast was brutal. Lawrence was a man of the countryside, skin marked by the sun, grey hair cut simply. He didn't smell of imported perfume. He smelled of earth, of work. His old dusty pickup was parked further back, a dinosaur among the imported sports cars that filled the entrance. Lawrence opened a tired smile when he saw his son. "Ryan, my son, I managed to get away early. Happy birthday. I brought—" He was interrupted before he could raise the small package. "What are you doing here, Dad?" Ryan hissed, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one important was watching. "I came to see you." "It's your birthday," Lawrence said, his smile faltering, confused by the coldness. "I told you I was busy. Look at your condition. You can't come in like this. You're dirtying the carpet," Ryan said, although Lawrence was still outside. 2 of Ryan's new friends, young investors in suits, approached out of curiosity. "Any problem, Rye?" one of them asked, looking Lawrence up and down with veiled contempt. That look was the trigger. Ryan's shame turned into cruelty. He needed to prove he didn't belong to that world of dirt and cattle. He belonged to this one, the world of marble and success. "It's my father," Ryan said loud enough for his friends to hear. "He's a cattle rancher, you know. Lives in the middle of nowhere. I think he got confused and thought this was the corral. His friend's laughter was low, but cut through Lawrence like knives. The old man remained silent, the gift still extended. "Dad, you can't stay." "You're embarrassing me," Ryan said, his voice now firm and cold. "Ryan," Lawrence tried, his voice choked for the first time. "I just wanted to give you a hug." "No, you're leaving now." Ryan took a step forward, completely blocking the entrance, and then he uttered the words that would seal his fate. "You don't come in here. You never set foot in my house again. You understand? In my house." Lawrence looked at his son's face, the boy he taught to walk, the young man he sent to the best college, the man he loved above all else. He didn't recognize that person. The sadness in his eyes was an ocean. He slowly lowered his arm with the gift. "If that's how you want it," Lawrence said in a low voice, "that's how I want it. Now go," Ryan ordered. Lawrence didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just turned his back. Each step back to the old pickup seemed to take an eternity. Ryan watched, chest puffed with rotten pride, until his father got into the vehicle. Brittany appeared beside Ryan, her face pale. "Ryan, he's your father. He needed to learn his place, Brittany. I built all this myself. I'm not going to let him ruin my image." Lawrence started the pickup. The motor roared loudly, a rustic sound that didn't belong in that neighborhood. He maneuvered and left, taking with him the small gift that would remain on the passenger seat. Ryan adjusted his suit and returned to the party, forcing a smile. He was the king of his castle. Little did he know that the castle was made of sand, and the owner of the sand, the old man he had just expelled, was about to let the tide rise. The party continued, but something had broken. And it wasn't just a father's heart. While Ryan raised a champagne glass, feeling victorious for having protected his new life, miles away, Lawrence drove down the dark road. The tears he held in front of his son now ran freely down his weathered face. But those weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of decision. Lawrence's cell phone, a simple model, was on the dashboard. He picked it up and dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. "Nathan," he said when the other person answered. "It's time. Activate the protocol." The road back to the countryside was long and dark. Lawrence drove on autopilot, the pickup's headlights cutting through the night, while the landscape of buildings and artificial lights gave way to the darkness of the fields. Each mile driven was like a blow to his chest. The image of Ryan's face, contorted with shame and anger, wouldn't leave his mind. "My house," the boy had said. Lawrence let out a bitter laugh that soon turned into a dry sob. The birthday present, a pocket watch that belonged to Lawrence's grandfather, an item of incalculable sentimental value, was there on the passenger seat, its almost inaudible ticking against the sound of the engine. Lawrence remembered when Ryan was little. The boy loved the ranch. He ran after the chickens, tried to lasso the calves with a thin rope, and slept in his father's lap after a long day of riding. "I'm going to be like you, Dad," he would say, his eyes shining. "I'm going to take care of the cattle." Lawrence would smile, but he always wanted more for his son. He didn't want Ryan to have calloused hands like his back aching from the sun. Lawrence worked from sunrise to sunset, not just with the cattle, but with the land, investing, buying more and more acres, far beyond what anyone in the region imagined. He built a silent empire, an agrarian colossus, all so Ryan could have choices. He sacrificed himself after his wife's death. When Ryan was only 10 years old, Lawrence doubled his efforts. He became father and mother, but also became a tireless provider. He sent Ryan to the best private school in the neighboring town, then to the best college in Houston. He paid for the luxury apartment, for the car of the year, for designer clothes. He wanted Ryan to have the world, but somewhere along the way, the boy got lost. He began to be ashamed of his origins, began to refer to his father as just a farmer. Lawrence thought it was a phase, that maturity would bring the boy back. He was wrong. The humiliation at the mansion door wasn't the first, but it was the last. It was the most public, the most cruel. The word shame, spoken by his son, that broke something inside Lawrence. He had given Ryan wings, and his son used them to fly away and spit on the nest where he came from. A father's love was still there, but it was buried under deep pain and for the first time by a determined coldness. The man he called Nathan was his right-hand man, the trusted administrator who took care of the urban part of Lawrence's business, a conglomerate of investments and properties that Ryan didn't even dream existed. The protocol that Lawrence activated was simple: cut everything off. Ryan wanted to be his own boss. He would have the chance. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the party was ending. The last guests, already a bit altered, were saying goodbye. Ryan was exhausted, but satisfied. The night had been a success, a milestone of his social position. Brittany, however, was quiet. She watched as he supervised the initial cleanup, giving dry orders to the catering staff. When they were finally alone in the vast living room, she turned to him. "Ryan, what you did today was cruel." Ryan scoffed, loosening his tie. "Cruel, Brittany. Did you see his condition? Boots full of mud at a party like this. He wanted to sabotage me, humiliate me in front of my contacts. He's your father, Ryan. He raised you. He drove hours just to see you," she insisted, her voice low but firm. "And I told him not to come. He doesn't respect my space, doesn't understand my life," Ryan retorted, pacing back and forth. "I worked very hard to get here. I built my career from scratch at that company. I closed multi-million-dollar deals. I deserve this." He gestured to the mansion around him. "I can't let a cattle rancher, even if he's my father, tarnish the image I've built. People here are different. They judge by appearance." Brittany shook her head in disbelief. "He didn't seem to want to tarnish your image. He seemed to want to give you a gift." "A gift? What could he give me? More cheese from the ranch?" "A pair of dirty boots," Ryan mocked. "Brittany, my future depends on a big deal I'm closing. The biggest of my life. Appearance is everything. If my investors saw where I came from, they would hesitate. My father is a reminder of the past I overcame. A past that paid for the college, that put you in that company," she countered. The truth of those words hit Ryan, but he pushed it away with anger. He did his duty. Now I do mine, and my life is here. He has to understand that. Brittany looked at him for a long time. She loved the ambitious, charming man she had met, but that night she saw a side of him that frightened her, a cold, ungrateful side. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ryan," she said, climbing the stairs to the bedroom, leaving him alone in the giant room. Ryan stood still, the adrenaline of the party subsiding, giving way to an uncomfortable emptiness. He felt a pang of guilt, but quickly buried it under layers of arrogance. "I'm right," he said to the silence. "It's the price of success." He went to the bar and poured himself a shot of expensive whiskey. He toasted his reflection in the dark mirror. To the future. Ryan drank the whiskey in one gulp, the liquid burning his throat. He was confident in his future, especially in the big deal that would make him truly rich. What he didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, Lawrence was finally arriving at his ranch headquarters. He didn't go to the simple house where he always lived. He went to the central office, a modern building hidden in the heart of his lands, where Nathan was already waiting for him with a folder. "They're ready for tomorrow's meeting, Lawrence," Nathan said. "The main investor in Ryan's big deal is awaiting your instructions." Lawrence looked at the photo of his son on his desk and sighed. "Cancel the meeting and freeze the investment. Let's see how he does on his own." To anyone passing by the dirt road, Clearwater Ranch seemed like just another medium-sized rural property. A barbed wire fence, a simple wooden gate, and in the distance, a modest farmhouse with a porch and some leafy trees. That's what Ryan saw when he visited, which became increasingly rare. He saw his father as a hard-working man, yes, but limited. a cattle rancher who had some money saved, enough to pay for his college and give him initial help, but nothing close to the fortune Ryan now believed he was building on his own. The truth was that the modest house was just the facade. It was where Lawrence genuinely liked to live. It was the house where he was born, where he raised Ryan. But Clearwater Ranch wasn't just those 1,000 acres visible from the road. It was the heart of an empire. Behind the hill, out of sight of any casual visitor, the real operation began. Thousands and thousands of acres stretched as far as the eye could see, housing one of the largest elite cattle herds in the country. The technology there was state-of-the-art. Satellite tracking, genetic laboratories for breed improvement, complex irrigation systems that kept the pasture green even in drought. But the cattle were just one part. Lawrence was, above all, a man of the land. He owned land, vast expanses in 3 different states, and he was intelligent. Decades ago, Lawrence realized that money wasn't just in raising cattle, but in diversification. He began to invest the ranch's profits, first in urban real estate in Houston, then in logistics companies that transported his own production, and then he created an investment company, a holding company, to manage all of this. This holding was run by Nathan, a city man, loyal and discreet, who understood finance like Lawrence understood cattle. The company had a discreet name and operated quietly, buying stakes in promising businesses. One of these purchases was the investment company where Ryan, his son, now shone as a star executive. Ryan wasn't hired by chance. Lawrence, through Nathan, facilitated his entry. The multi-million-dollar deals Ryan closed were mostly transactions facilitated by Nathan's contacts, designed to inflate Ryan's ego and test his ability. Lawrence wanted his son to learn the value of work, but feared that the shadow of his wealth would make him weak. So he created this illusion. He gave Ryan a generous allowance, which Ryan thought was an intern's salary at first, and then an executive salary paid by Lawrence's company, allowing his son to build a life of luxury, believing it to be the fruit of his own effort. Lawrence hoped that eventually Ryan would mature and be ready to know the truth and take over the business. The mansion where Ryan threw the party belonged to one of Lawrence's real estate companies. The rent Ryan paid was, in practice, returning money from one of Lawrence's hands to another. Lawrence allowed it, hoping his son would gain responsibility. That early morning, in the ranch's central office, a place Ryan didn't even know existed, equipped with more technology than many Houston brokerages, Lawrence and Nathan reviewed the numbers. "He went too far, Nathan," Lawrence said, his face tired. He told about the humiliation at the door. Nathan, a man in an impeccable suit that contrasted with Lawrence's dusty boots, just listened. He never liked Ryan's arrogance, but kept his loyalty to Lawrence. "I warned you he was disconnecting from reality, Lawrence, the big deal he's closing." "I know," Lawrence interrupted. "It's the merger with the logistics group, the group we control." "Exactly." "Ryan believes he's negotiating with an outside investor," Nathan explained. "He's being arrogant in negotiations, demanding absurd terms, treating our representatives as if they were inferior. He believes he's a business genius." "He humiliated the work of my life," Lawrence said, his voice low. "He humiliated the land that paid for every expensive shoe he wears. He forbade me from entering the house I bought." There was a long silence in the office. The only sound was the soft hum of the servers monitoring the ranch's operations. "The protocol has been activated," Nathan finally said. "Starting tomorrow, the outside investor will back out. The bank that finances his car and apartment, which is our partner bank, will reassess his credit now that his big deal is at risk. His salary will be maintained for now, but the extraordinary bonuses and credit limits that sustained him will dry up." Lawrence looked out the window. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky orange over his fields. It would be the most difficult sunrise of his life. "He needs to fall, Nathan," Lawrence said with a heavy heart. "He needs to feel the ground. It's the only way for him to learn to look up and maybe down, where he came from. He'll fall fast, Lawrence. His lifestyle is based on smoke. Without our support, the smoke dissipates in days. So be it," Lawrence said. He picked up his grandfather's pocket watch, which he had left on the table. He locked it in a drawer. Ryan would have to earn that gift, and the path to that would be long, arduous, and would begin with the loss of everything he thought he had achieved. The next morning in Houston, Ryan woke up late with a slight headache from the party. He picked up his cell phone, expecting to see congratulatory messages from friends. Instead, he found an urgent email from his assistant. The subject was "Meeting cancelled urgent." It was the meeting with the main investor to close the deal. Ryan felt a chill. Cancelled? Why? He called the investor, but it went straight to voicemail. Something was very wrong. Ryan spent the entire morning in a state of growing panic. That deal was his consecration. It was what would take him from successful executive to elite player. He called Nathan, who in the company hierarchy was his distant superior, the administrator of the holding that oversaw the company where Ryan worked. "Nathan, good morning. Did you see?" "The investor group cancelled the meeting without explanation," Ryan said, trying to keep his voice calm, but failing. On the other end of the line at the ranch, Nathan listened with a neutral expression. "Yes, Ryan, I saw. They contacted me, said they're reassessing the partner's instability. Instability from me? I'm the most stable person in this deal." "I structured everything," Ryan protested indignantly. "Apparently they don't see it that way. There were reports of, how can I say, arrogance in negotiations and concerns about your personal risk management," Nathan said, choosing his words carefully. "Personal risk management. What does that mean?" "My party." Ryan broke out in a cold sweat. "I don't have details, Ryan, but the fact is, they're out." The deal, as it was planned, collapsed. Ryan hung up the phone stunned. He sat on the edge of the canopy bed. Brittany entered the room holding 2 cups of coffee. "Did you manage to talk to them?" "They pulled out," he said, his voice hollow. "It's over. Years of work thrown away for nothing." "Calm down, Ryan. It's just one deal. You can get others." "No, you don't understand," he shouted, standing up. "This wasn't just a deal. I depended on it. My bonuses, my projections, everything." Brittany backed away, scared by his intensity. "Ryan, it's just money." "It's just money," he laughed. A humorless laugh. "This mansion, Brittany, your car, your jewelry, all of this is just money, and it just disappeared." Ryan's panic was justified. He didn't live on his salary. He lived based on promised bonuses and unlimited credit that the company, controlled by Lawrence, provided him, believing his big deal would cover everything. He spent before earning. The day that started bad only got worse. He received a call from the bank. The manager, who until last week treated him like royalty, now had a formal and distant voice. "Mr. Ryan, we noticed a significant change in your future income projection, given the collapse of your merger agreement. Unfortunately, we'll have to reassess your limits." "Reassess how?" Ryan asked, his stomach churning. "Your main credit limit has been reduced by 90%, effective immediately. And I regret to inform you, but the financing on your sports vehicle is overdue. We need to regularize this within 48 hours, or we'll have to initiate the repossession process." "I have automatic debit," Ryan shouted. "Yes, sir. But the bonus you expected to receive that would cover this payment wasn't deposited. Therefore, the account doesn't have sufficient funds." Ryan hung up. He looked out the window and saw the red sports car gleaming in the sun, his status symbol, and they were going to take it. He tried calling the friends who were at his party the night before. The first, an investor, didn't answer. The second answered, but when Ryan started talking about the deal that fell through, the friend suddenly had to go into a meeting. The third was direct. "Look, Ryan, I heard what happened. That's too bad. But I can't mix friendship with business. I'm out of any partnership now. In less than 12 hours, Ryan went from king of the party to a pariah. Arrogance gave way to icy fear. He was alone. Brittany tried to help, but she didn't understand the complexity of the financial hole he had gotten himself into. He spent the next 3 days in a frenzy, tried to renegotiate with the bank, but doors closed, tried to sell stocks he thought he had, but discovered they were just options that depended on the failed deal. He was trapped. On the 4th day, a marshal knocked on the mansion door. He brought 2 documents. The first was a search and seizure order for the sports car. The second was an eviction notice. Eviction, Ryan stammered, reading the document, but the rent is paid. No, sir, the officer said impassively. The property owner is a corporation. They're alleging breach of contract due to the tenant's financial instability. You have 30 days to vacate the mansion. Ryan looked at the name of the owner corporation. It was a name he didn't recognize, a name that, if he knew, would lead him directly to Nathan's holding and ultimately to Lawrence. Brittany, who read the document over his shoulder, began to cry. "Ryan, what's happening? Did you lie to me? You said we had money." "I had it," he shouted, crumpling the paper. "They sabotaged me. Someone sabotaged me." He walked through the giant room, now a symbol of his humiliation. He kicked an expensive chair. He was cornered. And when a man like Ryan is cornered, he doesn't look for his mistakes. He looks for a scapegoat, and in his twisted mind, there was only one person who could be envious of his success to the point of sabotaging him. Someone he had recently humiliated. He grabbed his cell phone, ignored the dozens of collection messages. He had only one number in mind, the cattle rancher's number. He dialed his father's number once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Lawrence wasn't answering. Ryan's anger grew, fueled by desperation. "He's not going to escape from me," he muttered. He threw some clothes in a suitcase. "Where are you going?" Brittany asked, frightened. "To solve this," Ryan said with a feverish gleam in his eyes. "I'm going to that miserable ranch. He thinks he can sabotage me. He's going to give me the money I need, whether he likes it or not. He owes me this." He slammed the mansion door, leaving Brittany alone, and got into the couple's second car, Brittany's, driving at high speed to the countryside. While Ryan sped down the highway, driven by anger and desperation, life at Clearwater Ranch followed its usual rhythm. The cattle grazed, the ranch hands left for work before sunrise, and the smell of fresh coffee hung in the main house kitchen. But for Lawrence, nothing was usual. He had barely slept since the night of the party. Each report Nathan passed him by phone was a stab in his heart. "The car was repossessed today, Lawrence," Nathan said in his morning call. Lawrence closed his eyes. He remembered the day he taught Ryan to drive right there on the ranch in his old pickup. The boy could barely reach the pedals. "Faster, Dad," he shouted, laughing. "And the mansion notification was delivered," Nathan continued. The mansion, the place where his son forbade him from entering. Lawrence felt a wave of sadness, but his resolution didn't waver. He was on his porch, looking at the corral. The work there was hard, honest. Each board of that fence was nailed with sweat. What had Ryan built? A house of cards with his father's money, and still thought he had the right to humiliate the source of everything. "He called," Lawrence said, his voice grave. "My cell phone hasn't stopped ringing. They were unknown collection numbers, and his several times." "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked. "Nothing. I'm going to wait. He'll come here." His pride is hurt, but desperation is greater. He'll come with anger, Lawrence. He won't come asking for forgiveness. He'll come demanding. "I know," Lawrence said with a heavy sigh. "I know the son I raised, or rather, the son I spoiled. Prepare the main headquarters." The main headquarters wasn't the house where Lawrence lived. It was the administrative building, the nerve center of the empire. That's where the truth would be revealed, if necessary. Lawrence spent the day working. He didn't stay in the office. He went to the field. He needed to feel the earth under his boots, the weight of work on his shoulders. He helped the ranch hands brand the cattle, fixed a broken fence, the sun punishing his back. The workers respected him. They didn't see him as a millionaire, although they knew he was the boss, but as one of them, a cattle rancher, older and wiser. The boss seems sad today, a younger ranch hand commented to an older one. Family problem, the older one replied. The city son. That boy isn't worth the ground his father walks on. Lawrence heard, but said nothing. The shame he felt wasn't about himself, like Ryan would feel about him. It was the shame of having failed to teach his son the most important lesson, humility. At dusk he returned home, took a cold shower and dined alone. The simple food, rice, beans, a piece of meat and salad from the garden, seemed to have no taste. Each minute of silence was filled with waiting. He knew the confrontation was inevitable. He wondered if he was doing the right thing. Wouldn't it be easier to simply pay his son's debts, as he always did, bring him back, give him a scolding and move on? A father's love screamed for him to do that. But the wisdom of the man who built everything from scratch said otherwise. If he saved Ryan now, the boy would be lost forever, drowned in his own arrogance. The lesson had to hurt. It had to be definitive. Nathan's call came at the end of the night. He passed the last toll before your town, Lawrence. He should arrive in less than an hour. Lawrence took a deep breath. Thank you, Nathan. Let him onto the property, but tell security not to let him approach my house. Direct him to the central office, understood? And Lawrence, Nathan hesitated. Be strong. I will be, Lawrence replied, hanging up the phone. He didn't wait on the house porch. He got in his pickup and drove the 2 internal miles to the central office, a building Ryan had never visited, as he always stayed in the ranch's social area. Lawrence entered the large meeting room. A solid wood table with 20 seats dominated the center. On one wall, a detailed map of all his properties. On the other, monitors showing stock and commodity markets. That's where the real power resided. Lawrence sat in the head chair and waited. He was no longer just the wounded father. He was the owner of everything Ryan was about to lose, and the owner of the lesson Ryan was about to learn. The sound of a car screeching tires on the gravel outside announced the arrival. The ranch's security guards, already instructed, pointed to the building. The office door opened with a bang. Ryan entered, his hair disheveled, eyes red with anger and fatigue from the trip, his designer clothes wrinkled. He looked like a caged animal. He looked around confused. The place didn't look like Dad's little ranch. It looked like a company president's office. What is this place? Ryan growled, ignoring the room's grandeur. He saw Lawrence sitting at the head of the table, calm, his face hardened by decision. It doesn't matter you did this to me. Ryan advanced, slamming both fists on the polished table. You ruined me. You and your envy. You couldn't stand seeing me bigger than you. I want my money back now. Lawrence just stared at him, the old man's silence heavier than any scream. Ryan's accusation echoed through the conference room. Envy. The word hung in the air, absurd and poisonous. Lawrence remained seated, fingers interlaced on the table. He showed no anger or surprise. There was only a deep and tired disappointment in his eyes. Money? Lawrence finally spoke. His voice was low, but had the weight of all the land he owned. What money, Ryan? The money you earned. Don't play with me, old man, Ryan shouted, his face inches from Lawrence's. You pulled your strings. You called my investors. You sabotaged me. You destroyed my life just because I didn't want you at my party. Ryan was panting, the adrenaline of anger consuming what little reason he had left. He expected his father to shout back, to deny, to defend himself, but Lawrence remained silent, just watching his son lose control. I demand that you fix this, Ryan continued. I need $500,000 now to cover the hole. Then you're going to call the bank and the investors and you're going to... I'm not going to do any of that, Lawrence interrupted. The calmness in his father's voice was more maddening to Ryan than any fight. "You have to. You owe me. You ruined my future." Lawrence shook his head slowly. "I didn't ruin anything, Ryan. I just stopped building." Ryan laughed incredulously. "Stopped building? What did you build? A bunch of fences and a corral. I'm an investor. I work with millions. You don't understand anything about my world. On the contrary, son, I understand your world very well. I just don't belong to it. I own it." The statement was so absurd to Ryan that it took him a second to process. "You what? You're delirious. The sun fried your brain, old cattle rancher." Lawrence sighed. He didn't want it to be like this. He wanted his son to have come back with humility, asking for help. But Ryan came with demands and insults. The time for the gentle lesson had passed. It was time for the hard truth. "Ryan, sit down," Lawrence ordered. It wasn't a request. "I'm not going to sit. I want my money. You're not getting any money. You're going to sit and you're going to listen. Or you can leave through that door, exactly as you came in, and never come back. The choice is yours." Something in Lawrence's voice stopped Ryan. There was a finality there he had never heard. Trembling with anger but suddenly insecure, Ryan pulled a chair and threw himself into it on the other side of the long table. "Speak. Speak your nonsense, and then give me my money." Lawrence ignored the last part. "You accused me of envy," Lawrence began. "You who live in a rented mansion, drive a car you can't afford, and brag about deals that were never yours. You accuse me of envy." "Lies. I got everything on my own," Ryan countered. "On your own?" Lawrence asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's see. 5 years ago you were hired by Future Investments." "Right. A highly contested position. I passed the process. I was the best." "You were the only candidate considered," Lawrence said, "because Future Investments is a subsidiary of my holding. I bought the company 6 months before you graduated through Nathan." Ryan went pale. "No, that's not true. Nathan is just an administrator. Nathan is my administrator, the man who manages my business in the city." "All of them." Lawrence stood up and walked to the large map on the wall. "You see this, Ryan? This here is Clearwater Ranch, where you are now. But this here," he pointed to vast other areas in other states, "is too. And this here," he pointed to a list of commercial buildings in Houston, "is too. And the logistics company you were trying to merge, I've owned it for 10 years. Ryan was shaking his head, refusing to believe. "You're lying. You're just a farmer." "I'm a cattle rancher, yes," Lawrence said with pride. "It was with cattle that it all started. But the money from the land, Ryan, I planted it in the city. The investor who pulled out of your big deal was Nathan, using an intermediary. He pulled out on my order." Ryan's world was spinning. Every certainty, every pillar of his self-perceived success was crumbling in seconds. "The bank that cut your credit," Lawrence continued. "I'm one of the biggest shareholders in that bank. One call from me was enough." "The car, the house," Ryan whispered, his voice failing. "The mansion," Lawrence said, sitting back down. "That carpet you said I was dirtying, I personally chose it 2 years ago. The house is mine, Ryan. You didn't forbid me from entering your house. You forbade me from entering mine." The silence in the room was total. Ryan looked at his father, but no longer saw the old man. He saw a stranger, a puppeteer who controlled every string of his life. The humiliation he felt at the mansion door was nothing compared to the humiliation that consumed him now. His entire life was a farce, the anger drained away, replaced by a cold horror. "Why?" he whispered, the only word he could form. "Why did you do this?" Lawrence stared back, decades of pain in his eyes. "Because I wanted you to be a man, Ryan, not a spoiled child. But you proved to me that I failed. You humiliated me." The office door opened and Nathan entered, holding a leather folder. "Lawrence, everything's ready," Nathan said, ignoring Ryan. Lawrence nodded. "Ryan, your lesson is just beginning." Nathan's entrance into the room was the final confirmation. The man Ryan saw as a senior work colleague, almost the distant mentor, was now beside Lawrence, looking at him not with anger but with professional coldness. Nathan opened the leather folder and placed a series of documents in front of Lawrence. "Why?" Ryan repeated, his voice choked, his arrogance completely shattered. He was no longer angry, he was broken. "Why?" Lawrence repeated, his voice tired. "Because your mother, before she died, made me promise that I would give you the world. And I tried, but I also wanted to give you character. I wanted you to learn the value of work. So I created an illusion. I gave you a job at my company, paid you an inflated salary, facilitated deals so you would gain confidence." Lawrence stood up and walked to the window, looking at his fields. "I thought that over time you would mature, that success would make you responsible, but it made you arrogant. You started to despise your origins, started to be ashamed of me, of the work that paid for every luxury you had." He turned to face his son. "I ignored the small things, the visits you cancelled, the calls you didn't return. I told myself it was the busy city life. But then," Lawrence's voice hardened, "you humiliated me. You called me a cattle rancher, as if it were an offense. You forbade me from entering my own house in front of your superficial friends. You shamed your mother's memory and the sweat of my life." Ryan lowered his head. Tears now ran silently, tears of shame, of pure and absolute humiliation. Every mockery he made, every time he felt superior, everything was a joke. He wasn't the king, he was the court jester. "I realized," Lawrence continued, "that I hadn't given you the world. I had given you a golden sandbox to play in. And the moment I took away the toys, you crumbled. Because there's nothing inside there, Ryan. There's no foundation." Nathan cleared his throat, bringing the conversation back to the present. "Lawrence, the papers." "Yes." Lawrence picked up the first document. "This," he slid it across the table to Ryan, "is your resignation letter from future investments. For just cause, incompetence, and mismanagement of company funds." Ryan looked at the paper, stunned. Lawrence slid another. "This is your bank account balance. After the bank covered the checks you issued, without funds and credit card debts, your balance is negative." Another paper. "This is a formal notice from Nathan as administrator of the holding, informing you that you have 24 hours to return your fiancée's vehicle, which is also in the company's name, Brittany." Ryan hadn't even thought of her. He had abandoned her at the mansion. And finally, Lawrence said, "This is the eviction document, but not for 30 days. This is effective immediately. You no longer have permission to enter the property." Ryan looked at the pile of papers that represented the end of his life. He had nothing, literally. The car that brought him there would be towed. He didn't have money even for the bus back. He had no house, he had no job, and worst of all, he had no dignity. What am I going to do?" he whispered, total despair taking hold of him. He looked at his father, no longer with anger but with the dread of a lost child. Lawrence watched for a long time. The father inside him fought against the businessman who had been betrayed. "You have two options, Ryan," Lawrence said, his voice calm. "The first, you can take a small amount I set aside for you, enough for a bus ticket anywhere in the country. You disappear from my life. I'll never help you again, but I'll also never look for you. You try to build your life on your own, like you bragged so much." Ryan shuddered, alone. He didn't even know how to start. "And the second option?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. Lawrence leaned forward. "The second option is work. Work at the company, but you fired me." "No," Lawrence laughed without humor. "Not in the office. You despised the origin of this money. You mocked the cattle rancher. So you're going to learn. The second option is you stay here on the ranch. Stay here as a manager, Ryan asked, a spark of hope. No, Lawrence said. You're going to stay here as the lowest ranch hand on this ranch. You're going to wake up at 4 in the morning. You're going to clean the manure from the corral you thought was so dirty. You're going to fix the fence under the same sun that marked my face. You're going to eat what the other ranch hands eat in the cafeteria. You're going to live in the workers' dormitory in a bunk. Ryan was horrified. You can't be serious. I'm your son. You remembered that now, Lawrence shot back cold as steel. Yes, you're my son, and that's why I'm giving you this chance. It's the last one. You're going to learn the value of every penny you spent. You're going to learn what respect is. You're going to earn your bread with the sweat of your hands. The hands you thought were too good for the land. Lawrence stood up, indicating the meeting was over. You're not going to give me the money, Ryan stated numbly. I'm not going to give you money. I'm going to give you a choice. The road or the corral. You have until dawn to decide. Lawrence turned and left the conference room, leaving Ryan alone with the papers of his ruin on the table. Nathan followed, closing the door softly. Ryan remained motionless. Dormitory, clean manure. He, Ryan, who dined at the most expensive restaurants. The idea was repulsive, but the alternative, the road, was terrifying. He looked out the window at the darkness of the ranch. For the first time in his life, he was truly, absolutely alone. Pride fought against panic. What would he do? Ryan didn't sleep. He remained sitting in that expensive leather chair in the empty conference room, while the night turned into the cold countryside dawn. The silence of the ranch was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of animals. Each minute was mental torture. He replayed his father's words. The owner was the old man. I own your world. The humiliation was so deep it seemed physical, a stone in his stomach. He thought of Brittany. What would she be thinking? She probably hated him. He left her behind to deal with the mess. He thought of his friends who disappeared like smoke. He thought of the option of taking the bus money. Go where? He had no real skills. His business genius was a farce orchestrated by his father. He didn't know how to do anything. Pride still screamed, run! Don't give him the pleasure of seeing you crawl. But fear was greater, fear of the unknown, of hunger, of real failure. When the first grey rays of sun began to filter through the window, the door opened. It wasn't Lawrence. It was an older man, his face lined by the sun and hands like leather. He wore a worn straw hat and work boots. He was the ranch foreman, a man named Ben. The boss sent me, Ben said, his voice rough. You decided? The bus to the station leaves in an hour. Ryan looked at the man. This was the type of person he used to ignore or treat with condescension. Now his fate was in his hands. Ryan swallowed hard. The bitter taste of pride was hard to swallow. I'm staying, he muttered. Ben didn't smile. He didn't pat Ryan on the back. He just nodded as if he expected it. Right, but here you're not, sir. Here you're just Ryan. Less than that. You're the rookie. Come with me. Ryan stood up, his legs stiff, his expensive clothes wrinkled like a clown suit. Ben took him outside the central office, passing sheds full of machinery Ryan had never seen. The smell was strong, a mixture of earth, animals, and work. They arrived at a long, low building, the dormitory. Ben opened the door. It was a simple dormitory with 10 metal bunks. Some men were already waking up, putting on their work uniforms. That one's yours, Ben said, pointing to an empty top bunk. In the locker there's a uniform. Get dressed. Breakfast is served in 10 minutes in the cafeteria. Work starts in 30. Ben turned and left. Ryan stood still. The other ranch hands looked at him with curiosity, some with veiled contempt. They knew who he was, the boss's son who lived in the city, the man who thought he was better than them. What are you waiting for, pretty boy? A butler? One of them mocked. Ryan felt anger rise, but swallowed it. He had no right to be angry. He went to the locker, got the uniform, thick jeans and a blue chambray shirt and a pair of heavy rubber boots. He changed in silence, storing his designer clothes in a bag. The cafeteria was a large, noisy hall. The coffee was black and strong, served in metal mugs. There was bread, butter, and scrambled eggs. Ryan, accustomed to his eggs Benedict and fresh orange juice, sat in a corner. The food was simple, but he was starving. He ate in silence, listening to conversations about cattle, weather, the broken fence in the south sector. It was a language he didn't understand. After breakfast, Ben met him at the door. "Ready, rookie? Your first task." Ryan expected something manageable, maybe feeding some calves. Ben took him to the largest stable, where the breeding bulls were kept. The smell was overwhelming. "Grab the cart and shovel," Ben ordered. "I want this stable clean by lunchtime. Every stall, no complaining." Ryan looked at the pile of manure. It was disgusting. It was humiliating. He looked at Ben, looking for any sign of a joke. There was none. "But I never," he started. "I don't care what you never did. I only care what you're going to do now. Start." Ben spit on the ground and walked away, leaving Ryan alone with the shovel. Ryan stood still for a full minute. His stomach turned. He thought about quitting, about running to the road. But where to? He picked up the shovel. His hands, accustomed to expensive pens and crystal glasses, felt the rough wooden handle. He took the first shovelful. The work was heavy, smelly, and thankless. Sweat began to bead on his forehead after 10 minutes. His muscles, accustomed only to the climate-controlled gym, began to burn. The other ranch hands passed by and watched. No one offered help. Some laughed. Lawrence watched everything from afar, from the top of a hill in his pickup. His heart was tight. Seeing his son in that situation was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was necessary. At lunchtime, Ryan could barely lift his arms. He was covered in dirt. He smelled bad. He was the last to enter the cafeteria. Everyone moved away from him. He ate again in silence, exhaustion overcoming humiliation. In the afternoon, Ben put him to work fixing fences. The sun was merciless. Ryan had to carry rolls of barbed wire and dig holes for the posts. His soft hands soon had blisters, and the blisters burst, bleeding. He didn't complain. He just gritted his teeth and continued. He was being driven by something new, not pride, but pure and simple survival. When the day ended, the sun was setting. Ryan could barely walk back to the dormitory. He took a cold shower in the communal changing room, the water burning on his cuts. He fell into the bunk and fell asleep before his head even fully touched the pillow. It was the first dreamless sleep he'd had in years. The days turned into weeks. The routine was brutal. Wake up at 4 o'clock, heavy work, simple food, sleep. Ryan didn't see his father. Lawrence watched from afar, receiving daily reports from Ben. "He's weak, boss," Ben said in the first week, "but he's not lazy. And most importantly, he didn't give up." Ryan was changing. His body was adapting, muscles getting stronger, skin getting thicker. But the biggest change was happening inside. One day, an older ranch hand saw Ryan struggling to lift a bag of feed. For the first time, he offered help. Ryan's armor of arrogance was finally breaking, but he still hadn't spoken to his father. And he didn't know that Brittany, his fiancée, was about to discover the truth. 2 months passed. Ryan was no longer the man who arrived at the ranch. He had lost the arrogance in his eyes and gained muscles in his arms. His hands, once soft, were now pure calluses, copies of his father's hands that he had despised so much. He learned to wake up before the sun, to appreciate strong coffee, and to respect the men he worked with. He learned the name of each horse, the difference between types of pasture, and the exhausting work that was keeping everything running. He rarely spoke, just worked, absorbing the harsh reality of the life he had mocked. Lawrence continued to watch from afar. He saw his son transform, but waited for something more. He waited for an apology. But Ryan, although humiliated, still hadn't sought out his father. He was serving his sentence in silence. Meanwhile, in Houston, Brittany had gone through her own hell. She saw the car being towed, was evicted from the mansion. Ryan's friends were also hers, and they abandoned her the same way. She found herself alone, without money, and betrayed. She had to move back in with her parents, humiliated. She hated Ryan for weeks, hated his weakness, his lies, but over time, anger gave way to confusion. She had met Lawrence a few times before Ryan elevated himself socially. He always seemed like a good, simple, kind man. Ryan's cruelty that night at the party and his total collapse. The pieces didn't fit. She began to investigate. As a lawyer, although junior, she had some skills. She searched for the name of the holding that owned the mansion, and after weeks digging through public records, she found the name of the majority shareholder, Lawrence. She was shocked. The simple cattle rancher was one of the richest men in the state. Everything had been a farce. Ryan wasn't a self-taught genius. He was a spoiled heir. And Lawrence wasn't a victim in disguise. He was a powerful patriarch who had pulled the rug out from under his own son. She needed answers. She needed to see Ryan. She drove to the ranch, the same path Ryan had taken in desperation. When she arrived at the imposing gate, the gate to the central office, not the simple house, she was stopped by security. She asked to speak with Lawrence. Lawrence received her in his office. She was nervous but determined. "Mr. Lawrence," she began formally, "I know everything. I know that you own the company, the mansion, everything." Lawrence nodded. "Yes, my dear, I am." "What you did to him was inhumane," she said, her voice trembling with contained anger. "You destroyed him." "I didn't destroy him," Lawrence said calmly. "I stopped him from destroying himself. He was rotten inside, Brittany, rotten with pride. The man you saw at that party who humiliated his own father, that wasn't my son. It was a monster I created with my money. I'm trying to save what's left of him. And where is he? What did you do with him?" "He's free to go whenever he wants," Lawrence said. "He chose to stay and is working like any other ranch hand." Brittany was incredulous. "Working Ryan in the field?" "Come," Lawrence said. He took her in his pickup to a distant pasture, where a team was fixing a long fence line under the midday sun. Brittany looked for Ryan. She didn't find him. She saw a group of dirty, sweaty men with straw hats. Then one of them turned to grab a hammer. It was him, but it wasn't him. The face was the same, but thin, sunburned. The body was strong, solid. He moved with purpose she had never seen. "Ryan!" she shouted, getting out of the car. Ryan froze. He hadn't seen Brittany since the night he abandoned her. He saw her there, clean, beautiful, coming from a world that no longer existed for him. Shame flooded him. He was no longer the executive in a suit. He was a dirty worker, smelling of sweat. "Brittany, what are you doing here?" he said, unable to look her in the eyes. I discovered." "Your father, he owns everything," she said, her eyes scanning his state. "I know," Ryan said bitterly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, gesturing to the barbed wire. "Let's get out of here. Let's sue him. Let's leave." Ryan interrupted her, and for the first time he laughed. A short, dry laugh. "Leave to where, Brittany? Go back to the life he paid for? You still don't understand? I'm nothing. I never was anything. I'm a fraud." "Don't say that, Ryan. We can start over together." Ryan finally looked at her, and in his gaze, Brittany didn't see the man she loved. She saw a stranger. "There is no us, Brittany. The man you were engaged to, that guy from the mansion, he doesn't exist. He was a lie." "But I'm here," she said, tears forming. "And why are you here? Because you discovered my father is rich?" he asked, bitterness consuming him. "You disappeared when I lost everything. Now that you know there's an empire here, you came back." The slap she gave his face cracked in the silent air of the field. "I came back because I was worried. I came back because I also lost everything because of you. I had to move back in with my parents, Ryan, but I still cared." Ryan rubbed his face. He knew he had been unfair. "I'm sorry, Brittany. You don't deserve this. None of us deserved it. But I can't go. I can't go back to being that person." "Then what are you going to be? A farmer?" she mocked, crying. "I don't know," he said honestly. But what I'm doing here is the first real thing I've done in my life. I can't stop." Brittany looked at him, at Lawrence, who was watching the scene from afar, by the car, and at the endless field. She understood. The man she loved was dead. And this new man, this sweaty stranger, didn't belong to her, and she didn't belong to this place. "Goodbye, Ryan," she whispered. She turned, got in the car and left, raising a cloud of red dust. Ryan watched the car disappear. It was the last link to his old life, cut. He felt empty but also light. He turned and picked up the hammer again. Ben, the foreman, who had silently observed everything, approached. "The fence won't fix itself, rookie." Ryan nodded and went back to work. That night, for the first time, Ryan didn't go to the dormitory. He walked slowly to the simple house on the hill, the house where Lawrence lived. He stopped on the porch, his heart beating hard. Lawrence was there, sitting in the rocking chair as if waiting for him. The son looked at his father, and the first word he would say after 2 months of silence would determine the rest of their lives. The night was cool. The crickets sang loudly, a sound Ryan used to find irritating, and which was now just the background of his new life. He was standing at the base of the porch steps, dirty from the day's work, exhausted, but present. Lawrence rocked slowly in his chair, the soft creak of the wood being the only other sound. He didn't turn to face his son, continued looking at the darkness of his fields. Ryan stood there for a long minute. The words he wanted to say seemed stuck in his throat, blocked by 2 months of hard work and a lifetime of pride. He thought about everything, the humiliation he caused and the humiliation he suffered. He thought about Brittany leaving, the last ghost of his fake life. He had nothing left to lose. He climbed the first step. The dirty rubber boot made a dull noise on the clean wood. "Dad," he said. His voice came out hoarse, strange to his own ears. The rocking of the chair stopped. Lawrence slowly turned his head. His eyes, which the last time they met were cold as steel, were now just tired and sad. Ryan climbed the rest of the steps and stopped in front of his father. He didn't know what to do. He wanted to scream, he wanted to cry, he wanted to ask for forgiveness, all at the same time. Instead, he did the only thing his exhausted body allowed him. He knelt. He placed his calloused hands, bleeding in some spots from the barbed wire, on his knees, and lowered his head. "Dad, forgive me," he whispered to the porch floor. "Please, forgive me." The tears he held for 2 months, tears of anger, of humiliation, of exhaustion, and finally of regret, came. He sobbed there on his knees like a child. The business genius, the king of the mansion, was destroyed. Lawrence looked at his son before him. This wasn't the arrogant monster who kicked him out of the party. This wasn't the spoiled young man who demanded money. This was his son. Finally, Lawrence stood up from the rocking chair. His knees cracked. He placed his hand, equally calloused, on Ryan's head. "Stand up, my son." Ryan raised his face, tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. Lawrence pulled him up. Ryan was taller than his father, but at that moment he felt tiny, and without thinking he hugged his father. A real hug, desperate, that he hadn't given since he was a child. He buried his face in Lawrence's shoulder, in the smell of earth and work that he once despised. Lawrence hugged back, tight. The father also cried silently, the tears of an old man who feared he had lost his only son to the world. "I forgive you, Ryan," Lawrence said. His voice choked. "I forgive you." They stood there for a long time. The hug healed more than 2 months of separation. It healed years of distancing. "I'm a disgrace, Dad," Ryan said, pulling away but still holding his father's arms. "Everything I did, what I said—" "What you did was wrong," Lawrence said seriously, "but what you did in the last 2 months. You worked. You didn't give up. You swallowed your pride and worked like a man. Ben told me. He said, You're the most dedicated ranch hand he has now." "I had nowhere to go," Ryan admitted. "You always had. The road was there. You chose the fence. You chose the work." That made me proud. It was the first time Ryan heard the word proud from his father in a positive context in years. "I want to stay, Dad," Ryan said firmly. "I don't want the dormitory. I want to truly learn what you do. I want to learn about the cattle, about the land. I want to deserve my place." Lawrence looked at his son. The gleam of arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet determination. It was the same gleam Lawrence had when he started, decades ago. "The work is hard," Lawrence warned. "I know. I'm already doing the hardest." Lawrence smiled, a real smile. "No. The hardest isn't cleaning the corral. The hardest is managing. It's deciding which animal lives, which dies, when to plant, when to harvest, when to risk everything in a drought." He placed his hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Tomorrow you're not going to the fence. You wake up at 4 as always, but you'll ride with me. You'll be my shadow. You won't be a ranch hand. You'll be my apprentice." Ryan felt a wave of relief and purpose that no multi-million-dollar deal had ever given him. "Yes, sir. Yes, Dad. Now go, take a shower. There's a guest room available here in the house. Your mother decorated it for you a long time ago. It's time you used it." Ryan entered the simple house, the house he always thought was too small. Now it seemed like a palace. In the following months, Ryan became Lawrence's shadow. He learned to read the land, to understand logistics, to negotiate with suppliers, this time with respect. He learned about the silent empire his father built. And more than that, he learned about the man who was his father, a genius of the land, a man of his word, whose greatest wealth wasn't in the banks, but in humility and hard work. A year later, Lawrence and Ryan were in the same conference room where Ryan's life had collapsed. Nathan was there presenting the annual reports. "And as you can see," Nathan said, "with Ryan's management in the cutting logistics sector, we increased efficiency by 20%. Ryan, now dressed in a clean but simple shirt and jeans, just nodded, taking notes in a notebook. He didn't brag, he just worked. When the meeting ended, Lawrence called Ryan to his private office. He opened a locked drawer. "I wanted to give you this on your birthday last year," Lawrence said. He took out his grandfather's pocket watch, the same one he took to the party. "Dad, I can't accept," Ryan said, looking at the object. "You couldn't," Lawrence corrected. "Now you can. You're no longer the man who thinks he owns the world. You're the man who understands the work that builds it." Lawrence placed the watch in his son's calloused hand. "You're no longer the spoiled son who humiliates his father. You're the cattle rancher, just like me." Ryan held the watch, the weight of the legacy in his hand. He looked at his father, the man who destroyed him to save him, the owner of the mansion, the owner of the company, but above all, the owner of the humility he finally learned.